Hello friends, in the earlier lecture concerning the environment, tourism, we talked about the various issues and concerns which are related to the environment and tourism, and how tourism industry definitely gets a boost when they are getting some kind of better environment where people are visiting these places. So tourism as a sector develops in those regions where there are better environmental prospects. So in that sense, how both of them, they are dependent on each other, in that sense that the areas which are better suited from the point of view of tourism, they are being harnessed by the various agencies, whether the governmental agencies or non-governmental agencies, so that any kind of development in these regions can take place. So we talked about the kind of concerns in that particular lecture, and we also talked about the positive social effects of environment of tourism in that particular region, in the context of the way environment impacts it. We also talked about the negative impacts in that context, that how the negative impacts, they are also very, very relevant when one is talking about the social effects of tourism. So all these kinds of things, they were being discussed in the last lecture, and today we'll talk about the other concerns which are related to the concerns of the environment, where we talk about that how the managing the impact of the tourism in the framework of the policy or the designs, and the question of the development of the various facilities, or the way how one can in a way use the resources in terms of managing those resources, how the visitors, they have to be managed in a particular manner, how the promotion and the marketing has to be done in a certain manner by the people, those who are concerned in these in this sector. And the question of education, where we will talk about the codes of behavior, the explanation and teaching the staff with regard to such kinds of concern, and the research and monitoring, which is again in the context of the environmental quality. So all these kinds of concerns are very relevant from the point of view of environment, and when one is talking about the various kinds of impacts which are there on these kinds of industries which are related to tourism, then we find that all these kinds of challenges, they have to be negotiated by some kind of a planning, and when this kind of a planning is done in a certain manner, then definitely it is very helpful from the point of view of the economy as well. So one has to see that what kind of things are being evaluated, and they are being seen in a framework of whether they are useful in that sense. Water usage, for example, or the energy usage in these regions, how the water or the waste is being managed in these regions, and the way the habitat is being conserved, and what is the value of the land, and the way host and the guest, they are being interacting with each other. So what can be the parameters in that sense, in the context of having some kind of a research with regard to the tourism sector, and all these kinds of concerns, as you can see on the screen as well, that they are being in a way evaluated or being seen. And when all these kinds of concern, whether the water usage, energy usage, waste management, habitat conservation, invasive species, value of land, and guest host interactions, all of them, when they are being seen or they are being evaluated by the experts, then they draw certain kinds of conclusions based on their evaluation, and then they decide about the future course of action as well. Many times it is also being talked about in the framework of the responsible or the alternative tourism as well, and it is a kind of tourism which, while safeguarding the experience of travel, would also further the mutual understanding between the various people. It will prevent the environmental as well as the cultural degradation, and also the exploitation and the dehumanization of the local population. So we find that how the alternative or the sustainable tourism, it is very useful in that sense that it is trying to safeguard the experience of travel, but at the same time it is also furthering the cause at different levels, whether at the level of understanding between the people, at the level of preventing the environmental and cultural degradation in any manner, and how the way the exploitation and the dehumanization of the local population. So all this should be seen in that particular context, that these kinds of parameters which are there, for example, the exploitation and dehumanization of the local population should not be done at any level. And we also see that how they also understand the ways in which the responsible tourism helps in preserving the environment. And when one is talking about the question of learning the problems which are associated with responsible tourism, and some of the available solutions could be seen in the context of that, how the know-how which is being played by the government, industry and the local residents in protecting the environment while expanding the tourism industry. So we find that all these kinds of aspects, they have been very very relevant in the context of the development of tourism. And responsible tourism definitely helps in preserving the environment, where the people, those who are the tourists, they are responsible in a certain manner for preserving the environment as well. And we also see that the kind of key role or played by the government, industry and the local residents in protecting the environment is very very important. And they also focus on expanding the tourism industry as well, that how they have to provide some kind of an impetus in terms of developing the tourism industry. And the issue of idea or the concern of the alternative tourism is also very important, that how it has some kind of source in the two contemporary ideological preoccupations. One is the counterculture rejection of the modern mass consumerism, and a concern for the impact of the modern industrial development for the third world societies. So when you talk about the alternative tourism, when it is being discussed, then we find that the source of this is in two contemporary ideological preoccupations which are there. As I told you, the counter-cultural rejection of the modern mass consumerism, and how the modern mass consumerism is being in a way counter-cultural manner, it is being rejected in that sense. And we also find that there is a kind of concern for the impact of the modern industrial development on the third world societies, that how third world societies, they have been affected by these kinds of concerns which have been seen in these contexts as well. Then we also see how the counter-cultural alternative tourism, it inverts the values, motives, attitudes and the practices of the conventional mass tourism. And the image of the counter-cultural alternative tourist is that of one who would not go for mere experiment, entertainment, recreation or any kind of a relaxation, and an adventurer or one who rejects home society and culture and seeks strangeness of the world of others and tries to experience authentic life. So we find that how the countercultural alternative tourists behave, which is not in consonance with any kind of mass tourism which is prevalent in a general manner. So he is trying to behave in a totally different manner, and he is trying to seek the strangeness of the world of others and tries to experience the authentic life. So many times we find that it is the role which is generally seen in the context of the anthropologists as well, those who live in those societies, and they live there as some sort of a member of that society. They observe their day-to-day life, their customs, traditions, practices, so as to not only know about them, but at the same time acquaint themselves with all those sorts of practices and rituals and cultures which are part of their lives, and later applying those ideas in their research to know more about the other societies, or to make some kind of comparison between the various kinds of societies which are there. So definitely such kind of things, they also in a way help in understanding a particular society, and at the same time we also find that these kinds of practices they open some kind of gates for further research when people they live in these societies, and then while living there they tend to understand these societies and make all sorts of efforts in terms of understanding these societies. So in that sense it is a very good kind of a practice, and we also find that when one is traveling by oneself or in small groups, spontaneously changing the plans according to one's interest, disposition and opportunities, and it is also self-reliant and enterprising, and accepting the hospitality of the humble peasants and the tribal people, eating their food, drinking with them their water, and without any kinds of concern for the comfort or the health. So this kind of a participation in the conservation efforts, it contributes in the environmental protection as well, because they are not overusing the resources, they are not wasting the resources, they are using the resources the way they are being used by the indigenous people. They are living with them, they are observing their life. So it is a kind of a good indicator in that sense. And we also find that the concerned alternative tourism, it is being defined as a just form of travel between the members of different communities, and they seek to achieve the mutual understanding, solidarity and equality among the participants, and it is an alternative to both mass and rucksack kind of a thing which is seen in this particular context. We also find in this particular context that the way these kinds of things they happen, and we also find that the tourists, those who are being engaged in such kind of a tourism, they are not creating some kind of a baggage to the people, those who are living in that particular society. And we see that they are also trying to conserve or protect the local area in that sense, and it is an alternative to both the mass as well as the rucksack tourism in that context. And we also see that the kind of tourist attitudes and the relationships which are there and with the locals is very, very important, and they also create some kind of socio-economic and the cultural impact in that sense. And so the just tourism is intended to mean that both parties should equally benefit from each other personally and economically from the encounter which is happening between them. And when there is an exchange between the local population and the tourists, those who are going, and when they are living together in certain spaces, then they are able to understand each other in a far better manner, because they are spending a lot of time, and the tourists, those who have visited, they are living there and they are trying to observe it. So all this helps in that way, where the relationship is not only equal but it is equally beneficial to both of them. And we also find that the principal means of promotion are the various small scale projects in the developing countries, which are established with the local consultation and participation, and they typically bring small groups of visitors to a locality where they are being given opportunity for direct interaction with the locals as equals, and for a comprehension of their real life and problems which are unadulterated by embellishments. And the visitors are understood to pay for their stay, and there is no exploitation involved. So in that sense, when we try to understand that how when visitors, they are in a way staying in these regions, and they are paying for this stay, so there is not any question of any kind of an exploitation which is happening. And how we also see that when all these kinds of promotions are happening in which are concerned with the small scale projects in the developing countries, then the local consultation and participation is very, very important in that context. So when such kind of visits, when they are being happening at different points of time, we find that the alternative tours are different in many aspects, in the length of the visit, for example, or the size of the group, the kind of budget they have, and the most important of all, the purpose of the visit. All of them, they are very, very important in the context of the alternative tours. And many times we find that alternative tours are many times different in the way they are being planned by different people, and not everyone is living at the same for the same number of days or months, or the kind of time which they will spend in that particular region. So the size of the group definitely will be again very important, that how many people will stay there. And it will also be related to the question of money which they will spend there, the kind of budget which they have, and definitely the question of in a way the kind of what is the purpose, what is the motivation, what is the idea in terms of their stay. So we can in a way see the various kinds of tours, whether the study tour, the cultural event tour, developmental project tour, and village visit and stay program. So all these kinds of things, they could be seen, that people when they are visiting these areas, they are engaged in whether they want to study that area, that is their concern, or they are the cultural event tour, whether they want to understand the culture of that particular place, what is their intention in terms of staying at these places. So we find that many times the various kinds of tours which we have talked about, they are also closely related and not easy to distinguish between them. So an effort is to be made to encourage and facilitate people to people encounters, where the visitors and host, they can sit together and they can interact with each other. So this will definitely help in terms of understanding each other and the problems which are there with regard to each other. So in that sense, we find many times other kinds of things or activities, they are also being undertaken, including the orientation lecture. Visitors sit and listen to what the host have to say or to communicate about their unique culture, environment, social and economic problems. Then the role of the slide projectors, audio visual aids, and university intellectuals, experienced developmental workers and people specialized in specific issues is very crucial in making the orientation lectures more informative and interesting. So we find that how over a period of time, this concern of the orientation lectures, where how the visitors as well as the host, both of them, they are interacting with each other, and how the modern technology in the framework of the audio visual aids, etc., that is also being used to make it not only more interesting, but at the same time maximum output of these things could also be undertaken. And then we also see that the way these orientation lectures, they are being designed, and that they are not only, that they must not only be informative, but they should also be interesting, so that the other party has that kind of interest being maintained in them. And we also find that some of the scholars, they have seen or they have argued that there is no guarantee that the eco-tourist or alternative tourist will behave differently from the mass tourist that is wanting the maximum at the least cost. And he believes that tourism will always include an element of exploitation, as it is a human activity. So B. Weller has given this kind of an idea, and he believes that there is no guarantee in that sense that eco-tourist or the alternative tourist will have a different kind of a setup, mental setup in terms of behavior from the mass tourist. And as tourism is an industry where exploitation is definitely involved, so he would also try to look into it. So we see that how tourism is motivated by the self-interest, that is what is in it for me type of an attitude, and how the host community likes to extract something from the tourist. So these are the kind of concerns which one can see when one is talking about the concerns of tourism. And when you talk about the responsible tourism, then the kind of emphasis on the interaction and the direct experience among the visitor and the host does not take away the possibility of negative cultural impacts. And the ideology of alternative tourism rejects the conventional tourism in toto, and we find that it is trying or striving to be a full-fledged alternative to it. So this in a way precludes it from seeking a chance to reform the tourist establishment and mass tourism from within as well. So these are some of the concerns which one has to take in account when dealing with the issues of tourism as well as environment. And when one is trying to in a way criticize the responsible tourism, that these concerns are also very relevant from that point of view as well. And the irony of the situation is that the responsible tourism's very ineffectiveness is likely to see its overt acceptance as global tourism strategy by an industry which is eager to foster a better image, keen to be seen to be green. And the critique could also be in the framework of the tourism industry can now see profit in ostensibly becoming green. So we find that how the responsible tourism appeases the guilt of the thinking tourist while providing holiday experience, and the industry is also happy because more discerning range of market can be catered for by legitimately opening new areas to tourism, and overall demand for and growth of tourism on a global basis continues unabated. And many times we find that responsible tourism appears to be superficial in nature in that context. And when one tries to talk about the alternative tours, then arrangements are done through the local partner concerning the accommodation, local transport, food, etc. And because they understand the situation in a better manner, and how the locals and the tourists, they are on equal terms and they sit at the same place. And so in a way the tour helps in retaining the intrinsic cultural values of the communities, and it acts as an instrument for international and national brotherhood, peace and harmonious coexistence. So in that sense we find that such kind of exchanges are mutually helpful, and the tour is itself packaged and marketed on these lines. And how the governments also play an important role here, where the carrying capacity of each destination must be defined and there should be specific guidelines in this regard. So how the tourism is considered integral to land use planning at the destination, and environment friendly construction guidelines are there. And the people, those who are not adhering to these guidelines, they should be punished, and the law enforcement agencies, they should be empowered that they carry out their duties meaningfully. And the role of the media is also very important, that it should be used extensively for creating the environmental awareness. So the government, the non-governmental agencies, media and the industries, all of them, they should definitely play an important role in that context. And the role of the locals is also very important, that they should take help from the government and the tourism industry. All of them, they should collaborate with each other in that sense, that the harmonious balance between the environment and the industry can be maintained. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.